3 scratches mean you're dead. The first just appeared on my door. I live in a small town in Vermont. I won't tell you its name, mostly because I don't want to draw any attention to myself. I moved here 6 months ago to take over this record store that's been a town fixture for yonks. The previous owner, Martin, was desperate to leave. Practically gave the place away. His hands shook so bad he could barely sign the papers, and he kept looking over his shoulder like he expected someone or something to be standing there. Should have been my first clue. But when you've been living out of your car, scraping by on part-time work at gas stations and dollar stores, landing a deal like this feels like winning the lottery. The store barely breaks even, but it came with a small apartment above the store, a kind of attic flat with a little kitchenette and a serviceable bathroom. The pipes groan at night and the floorboards bitch every time you take a step, but it's warm, safe, and has an awesome view over the rooftops. At first, it felt like I'd stumbled into some perfect slice of small-town Americana, the kind they put on postcards or in those Hallmark movies my mom used to watch. Victorian homes built from locally quarried stone line the winding cobblestone streets. Neighbors wave but don't pry. Weekly farmers markets in the town square where old ladies sell jam in mason jars with handwritten labels. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business but pretends they don't. My first morning here, I was in the shop rearranging the store's inventory when Sheriff Tapper poked his head in. He's an older man with cheeks that never quite recovered from acne in his youth, a slight paunch, and a too calm voice that always leaves you wondering if he's hiding something. He offered to show me around the record store, basically just pointing out the dusty corners and the old fuse box. But before he left, he fixed me with a serious look. "Listen," he said, tapping a calloused finger on the old wooden countertop. "Since you're new here, there might come a time you notice some weird shit scratched into your door. If you see anything like that, you come to me right away. Day of no excuses." He tried to keep it casual, but his eyes gave him away. "Probably won't happen to you," he added quickly. "But if it does, we like to handle it fast. You absolutely have to tell us." "Got it." I remember staring at him, a half-smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Sure, it was some kind of joke. Sure. But why? Who's doing it? Tapper just waved a meaty hand, dismissing the question like smoke. "Wouldn't want to scare you off on your first day," he said, and walked out, letting the shop's brass bell announce his exit. I chalked it up to small-town eccentricities, maybe some local pranksters who like to scratch up doors. But early the next morning, I noticed the sheriff walking the length of Main Street, shining his flashlight on every door, examining them one by one. He did it methodically, like a doctor checking stitches, looking for something very specific. When he caught me watching from my second-floor window, he gave me a curt nod and moved on. He does this every morning, every single one without fail. Rain, shine, or New England blizzard. A couple of months later, I was up before dawn, flipping through dusty vinyl records, when I heard a low, rhythmic stomping. Peering through the concert posters plastered on the shop's front windows, Kurt Cobain's dead eyes staring back at me, I saw them marching by, mothers in thick wool coats, their faces set like stone. Men clutching garden tools and kitchen knives that gleamed dully in the pre-dawn light. Old Mr. Harrison from the hardware store had his Winchester cradled in his arms like a sleeping child. I followed them. I don't know why. Maybe the same morbid curiosity that makes you slow down past a car wreck. They converged on a small blue house near the town square, the kind with gingerbread trim and a wraparound porch. The woman they dragged out was still in her nightgown, her feet bare against the cold cobblestones. She didn't fight back. She just kept shaking her head, tears cutting clean tracks down her dirt-smudged cheeks, begging them to give her more time. "And don't you see this is all bullshit?" Eventually, her words dissolved into raw screams about how they were all crazy, her fists beating away at anyone who tried to approach. The crowd's response was a wall of sound. Accusations about overstaying, warnings about putting us all at risk, demands that she honor the arrangement. I thought about calling the cops, but there were in the crowd, too. Local badges shining in the golden dawn, uniforms crinkled and unironed like they'd hurried to put them on. 20 minutes later, someone pulled up in a pickup truck already loaded with boxes and suitcases. like they'd packed her belongings before even getting her out of bed. They pretty much dragged her kicking and screaming into the passenger seat, and the truck disappeared down the mountain road that leads out of town. After that, the mob dissolved, and that whole day I didn't hear another word about it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment above the shop, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in these old windows, and tried to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Small towns can be insular, I told myself. Maybe she'd done something to deserve it. The next morning, I took a walk past the blue house. Front door still wide open, yesterday's newspaper sitting untouched on the front lawn. That was when I noticed the marks on her door. 2 of them, shaped like crooked eyes, scratched deep into the wood. They looked kind of fresh, the wood around it still pale and raw like exposed bone. I took a picture and reverse image searched the symbol, but came up empty. Just page after page of actual eyes staring back at me until I had to close the browser. Figured maybe it was unrelated. Told myself that coincidences happen all the time. Life settled into a rhythm after that first morning. I threw myself into running the store, learning the regulars' tastes, ordering rare pressings they'd mention offhandedly. One customer in particular, Cal, would spend hours browsing the jazz section, talking about Miles Davis and John Coltrane like they were old friends. "You've got good instincts," he told me one afternoon, carefully sliding a Thelonious Monk album back into its sleeve. "Most newcomers, they don't." He trailed off, his weathered face clouding over. "They don't last long enough to learn the ropes." I couldn't help myself. Like that woman? The one they drove out my first week here. The vinyl sleeve crinkled in his suddenly tight grip. "Don't go thinking we're a bunch of bullies. That was a kindness," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. If she'd stayed, she'd still be gone, just in a different kind of way. He set the record down with trembling hands and left without another word. 2 months passed. I was getting comfortable and starting to feel like I belonged. For the first time in as many years, I was earning a weekly wage, went to bed full each night, have money left over to furnish my loft just how I liked it. It was odd, almost novel, having a place I could call home. Except for that one morning with the woman in the blue house, and Sheriff Tapper walking past each morning to inspect doorways, this place was nothing short of heaven to me. Then one morning, the parade of footsteps returned. This time, they came for old Abel, who'd run the bakery for 40 years. Everyone knew Abel. He donated day-old bread to the food bank and remembered every kid's birthday with a free muffin. The scene was different this time. Abel hugged each person in the crowd, tears in his eyes but a gentle smile on his face. "It's time," he kept saying. "I'm just surprised it took him this long." The mob was somber, some people openly weeping as they helped him pack his truck. I checked out his door the next day, and just like the blue house, there was a symbol etched into the wood. Just one this time, staring out like a cyclopean eye. I asked around about these symbols. Some folks brushed me off, others gave evasive answers. But one thing was consistent. If your door got marked, then you had to leave town immediately. It was said to keep everyone else safe. There was talk of consequences, of some looming danger no one wanted to describe, like a shadow you catch in your peripheral vision but disappears when you turn to look at it. It became clear the sheriff's morning inspection was his way of catching these scratchings early. He'd warned the inhabitants to leave. Sometimes they went peacefully like old Abel. Sometimes, when the marked was a newer person in town, they put up a fight. No one ever explained who or what made the marks. The best I could piece together was that after 3 markings, something bad happened. Last night, I was doing the final count of the register when rapid footsteps approached the shop. I glanced up, ready to wave away another late customer, when someone started pounding on the door with such urgency that the bell above it jangled. Through the concert posters, I could see Cal's familiar silhouette, but something was wrong. His normally relaxed posture was rigid, and he kept shifting from foot to foot like he was standing on burning coals. I opened the door. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the autumn chill. "Listen carefully," he said, the words tumbling out so fast they blurred together like cars in a highway pileup. One hand gripped my shoulder with crushing force. "No matter what happens tonight, stay inside. Keep the lights off, TV off, absolute silence. Lock everything. His eyes darted to the lengthening shadows that crept across the cobblestones. If someone knocks, if they ask to be let in, don't move, don't make eye contact through the windows, and whatever you do, do not respond. Cal, what's going on? The Peterson family, he explained hurriedly, his breath coming in short gasps like he'd been running. 3 markings. They covered it up with paint. Didn't want to leave. Left us wide open. His grip tightened painfully, then released. I can't say more. Rules. I need to get home before dark. He checked his watch and his face, impossibly, went even paler, like all the blood had been drained out. Oh God, oh God. I might already be too late. He sprinted away before I could stop him, his footsteps echoing off the old buildings. I stood there with the key half turned in the lock, watching him disappear around the corner. I followed his instructions, though I felt ridiculous doing it, like a kid hiding under the covers from the boogeyman. But something in his voice, that raw animal fear, had sent ice water through my veins. I'd never seen someone so genuinely terrified, not even that first woman they'd driven out of town. The evening crept by in suffocating silence. I sat in my darkened apartment, watching the streetlights flicker to life outside. Every creak of the old buildings settling made my heart skip. I kept checking my phone, considering calling Cal, but his warning about absolute silence held me back. The first knock came at 12:07 a.m. I know because I'd been obsessively checking the time. It was soft, tentative, like someone testing if the sound would carry. 3 gentle taps, evenly spaced, coming from the shop's front door downstairs. I held my breath, Cal's warning echoing in my mind. For a long moment, nothing. Then it came again, harder this time, a rhythm of desperate needs. And then, hello! The voice sliced through the darkness, and my blood ran cold. It was Cal's voice, edged with the same fear, but quiet, like he was trying not to get caught. Please, I didn't make it home in time. I've been stuck out here in the dark for hours. I laid there, heart beating in my chest. Then I told myself I was being stupid, that this town was weird and superstitious, and if Cal was in trouble, I couldn't just leave him out there. What kind of person would that make me? Still, I walked quietly, each step careful and measured like I was crossing a frozen lake. I crept to the stairwell, tiptoed through the shadowy vinyl store where album covers seemed to follow my movement. Through the door's frosted glass, I could make out a shadow. It was roughly Cal's height and build. Please, the voice cracked, hitching on a sob that sounded like it was being torn from deep inside. Please let me in. It's so cold out here. So dark. The smart thing would have been to stay silent. But I had to know. If it's really you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Tell me your favorite record in the store. The silence that followed dragged on and on. Then came the response, in a voice that was both Cal's and not Cal's. I don't know. Ice crawled up my spine like 1,000 tiny spiders. Leave. I managed to choke out. Now. A pause. Then something outside laughed. Carrot? Didn't he tell you? It whispered, and I heard rather than saw a long fingernail trace its way down my doorframe. Carrot? Not to respond to anyone who came knocking, I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the first stair. The shadow behind the glass seemed to grow, spreading like a stain, darker than the darkness around it. I took the stairs 2 at a time, slamming and locking my apartment door behind me. I dragged my heavy oak dresser in front of it, then huddled in the corner of my bedroom, as far from any windows as I could get. The knocking continued sporadically through the night, moving from window to window, accompanied by Cal's voice trying different tactics. Pleading, demanding, bargaining. Around 3 a.m., it started cycling through other voices I knew. Abel, the woman from my first week, then a voice that sounded oddly like my own. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices seemed to seep through my fingers, straight into my brain. Sleep was impossible. I watched the clock tick through the endless hours. Finally, dawn broke to the sound of screaming. This time, the mob moved with purpose, but their usual grim determination had been replaced by fear. Sheriff Mills was already at the scene, his face the color of chalk as he waved people back. The mob had led me to a house 2 blocks away from my own, the Petersons' place. I recognized it because they'd painted their door recently, a cheery yellow that had seemed out of place in our somber little town. The door was hanging off its hinges now, splinters of wood scattered across the welcome mat like broken teeth. Blood was everywhere, pooling on the welcome mat where Home Sweet Home was now just Home SWME, trailing into the darkness beyond the broken door like breadcrumbs leading into a witch's forest. A police constable was scraping at something on the door. Fresh paint, still wet, hastily applied over familiar eye-shaped symbols. There were 3 of them. Must have been covering them up each morning. I overheard Tapper whisper gravely. They didn't have the best life. Reckon they had nowhere to go. Whole family, someone else whispered, drowning out his words. Tried to cover up the scratchings. You can't hide from them. They always know. I found Cal in the crowd, his face gray as week-old snow. This wouldn't have happened if they just told the truth, he said, shaking his head. If they'd just followed the rules. Why? I asked, desperate. What is this? I can't say. He attempted a reassuring smile that looked more like a grimace. But you should be safe, so long as you follow the rules. His expression shifted, became sharper, more focused. You didn't hear anything last night, did you? Open the door? Talk to anyone? I hesitated, then shook my head. No, nothing. The lie tasted like copper on my tongue. The bodies were wheeled out in black bags as the sun climbed higher. Back home, I checked the front door to the vinyl shop compulsively. No markings. I exhaled slowly, relief flooding through me. Maybe I could make this work. Sure, the town had its dark secret, but didn't they all? Some towns had corrupt mayors, others had toxic waste dumps, ours just had whatever this was. And hadn't they taken me in when I had nothing? Given me a home, a purpose, a place to belong? As long as you followed the rules, you could survive. People here did it every day. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, rehearsing all the reasons to stay, all the justifications for looking the other way. The mental gymnastics we do to convince ourselves that the monster under our bed is just a shadow, that the scratching at our window is just a tree branch. Then I saw it. There, carved into my attic door. A single eye-shaped symbol, the wood around it still fresh and pale. This isn't a door Sheriff Tapper can check. This is a door nobody should have had access to. So now I'm writing this, sitting cross-legged on my bed with my laptop balanced on my knees. I don't have any family left to miss me, and all the friends I've made are from here. They'd be more likely to show up with pitchforks than helping hands if they knew. I don't know what to believe anymore. Part of me thinks it's just town theater, or some madman with a twisted sense of humor. Part of me wonders if it isn't all just superstition turned hysteria, people fulfilling their own dark prophecies. But I just got back from the hardware store with a can of paint, and I'm sitting in front of this door, and I'm thinking I might tempt fate to cover up the mark and see what happens. Because here's the thing about living in your car. It teaches you that sometimes having nothing left to lose is its own kind of freedom. What do you think? Should I cover it up?